Welcome to Music Outlook LA, the podcast which highlights the independent artist, whether they are a musician, vocalist, actor, actress, live audio or in-studio engineer, or a videographer, photographer. I'm your host, Will Kimsey. Each episode, we'll look at the gigs of the independent artists, from the venues we play to how we set up and break down, the gear we use and why we use it, and the info we hope you'll find useful as we all make our way in the entertainment industry. Music Outlook LA is brought to you by Kim Z Entertainment LLC. Go to kim-zentertainment.com to find out what they're doing for the independent artist. Kim Z Entertainment LLC. Independent entertainment done independently.
My guest today is guitarist and professional set designer Andrew Reeder. Andrew is an indie musician currently performing with a rock, blues, and R&B cover band called Goat Rodeo, and I happen to be the keyboard player for that band. Spoke about it just briefly in the previous episode with my guest Gene Perry, who's the younger brother of our fearless leader Doug Perry for Goat Rodeo. Like Gene, I met Andrew through Doug, and today we're going to talk about Andrew's gigs, the gear he uses and why he likes to use it, his work as a set designer, and he's going to touch on that and see what info he'd like to share and pass on to the other independent artists out there, no matter what you're doing. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is Andrew Reeder. How you doing, my man?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Oh, no problem. No problem. When we were discussing some of the tunes that we're going to be covering for our rehearsal coming up, it just hit me. I need to have you on the show, not just because you're an indie musician, a guitar player, and I think your story is pretty special in and of itself, and I want to touch on that, but your regular 9-to-5, aside from playing guitar in the entertainment industry as a primarily set designer, which your resume covered, and we'll talk about that. But you also have a secondary gig as well, and you'll be getting onto that one as well. So let's just jump right on into it. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Andrew.
Well, I got my first Lego set when I was 6, and that was it. You know, I think that's all. It was over. It was pretty clear that I was going to be making things, that I was fascinated with building worlds. You know, I wouldn't duplicate what was on the box. I would always create my own shapes and forms. And, you know, this interest just persisted. It persisted through high school. You know, my parents had our home remodeled in the 70s. You know, I grew up with a lot of our bandmates in the Palisades back in the 70s. And they added on, and I saw the architectural drawings, and, you know, I really was interested in that. Right. And, you know, I went to school at UC Berkeley. I got an architectural degree there, and I took a couple of years off in between graduate study and undergrad. And I worked in architecture, and I began to realize that while I'd made a really good choice for myself academically, you know, the experience of working as an architect was really not looking so great. There were deficits in my skill level, and there were also deficits, you know, in just the ability to work as a team. You know, if there's any takeaways, you know, from today's conversation, you know, that's one of them. You know, that's sort of been the story of, you know, how I've matured over the years and learned to work, you know, on these Hollywood films, you know, with other people. So, you know, I graduated, I got into Yale University, you know, in their architecture program. That's not something that happens every day, you know, to people like me. And I figured I'd better go, even though there were signs that, you know, I really was heading in the wrong direction professionally for myself. And then some friends of mine who were in the USC Film School, who were aware of my sort of misgivings and frustrations of professional work in architecture, they said, you know, you really should consider set design. You really should consider the design of movies. And I'd never given it any thought, you know. And what I began to do, and this was back in the Stone Age, this was before Facebook, it was before Instagram, it was before social media, it was before email. I had, through a family contact, one person that I could reach out to for advice about jumping into the entertainment industry, because I knew nothing about it and I didn't know anybody. There was nobody in my family. My parents were academics at UCLA. They were in shock that, this kid who they'd spent money on and they'd raised, in for a proper, sort of profession, in architecture, was having second thoughts and thinking about the movie business. That was something way off their radar. They were terrified by it. They had no idea. I didn't know it, but, I figured I'd give it a go. So, from a very early age, I didn't have much to show that first production designer. His name was Neil Spizak. But I wrote him a letter and he didn't respond. And that's what you did back then. You literally wrote letters, you typed them up and you put them in the mail and you hoped that the person would open them. And then I followed it up with a phone call because, the family contact had given me his number, and that person knew that I was serious. And, I called him up and he agreed to meet with me. And, I took the interview and I was very serious. I arrived in a suit, which was the opposite of what, he was in shorts and a t-shirt, and he was already very successful. And he said, listen, you're at Yale University, you're at one of the greatest, design, drama, theater schools. You really should start learning about theater design, because that's much, much closer to what we do as set designers in the film business. And, I took a theater class, I followed his advice, and then, he knew of, maybe one or two people that I might want to contact when I graduated. And the rest was really up to me. It was about, and I think for anybody listening, if you're young and you're just starting out, and no matter what it is, there's a certain degree of fearlessness that I think you have to have. You have to be willing to reach out to people who are already established. And that's exactly what I did. I really had nothing to show. I certainly didn't have the website and body of work that I have now. And I didn't have the skill set. I didn't have the knowledge. But I did have some fledgling sort of academic work to show people. And I would just literally, I'd call them on the phone. I'd watch I would start watching the movies, and I would look for the names. And I'd never done that before. But, movies are designed by people. And I would start to get those names, and I would start to track down, their contact info, if it was an agent or if it was, someone at the guild, the Art Directors Guild that I now belong to. If you're a serious person and it's obvious that you're just trying to meet with someone for 2 minutes of advice, that's a pretty legitimate ask. And not everybody's going to say yes, but the ones that do, there's an opportunity there. And it's kind of like a door that gets pushed open just a little bit. And there's an opportunity when an established professional gives you the time of day and gives you that 5 minutes of their time. You want to make your best impression and you want to come across like you're serious. And so one thing led to another, and I just jumped in. And I started very slow, from the standpoint of very humble, modest projects. And as my expertise and my ability began to change, because I would work on my game. I know this is a musically based podcast. That's primarily, it seems, what a lot of the guests are here. It's just like learning an instrument. It's like you must understand a certain level of theory. You've got to have the raw goods to be able to play with anybody. And eventually, as I began working digitally, because the digital revolution was happening in the early 2000s, we were moving away from simply drawing by hand, and we were using the new tools that would come along with 3D modeling software and AutoCAD. These were like different instruments. That's what software is to me. And they have different sounds than the pencil. So when we're trying to design these films, they're just different instruments that we could pick up and find wild visual solutions for these movies. So that's really been my story about, constantly working on my game, trying to be a better artist. And as that's happened, as my expertise has increased, the scope and the types of projects that I've been working on have increased. They've become much more visual. The budgets have become much larger on the projects I work on than what I was working on, say, in 1998. So there's been this upward trajectory, but it didn't happen on its own. It's all been about hard work. It's all been about putting in the time.
Exactly. So speaking about the theory and the music, as well as the art and I'm going to get back to that for sure because I've got a lot I want to ask you about the art and everything else. When it comes to your guitar, it's a pretty interesting story, at least since I've only known you for maybe about a year.
Yeah.
I remember you telling me that you did play right-handed, and now that you're playing with the band, I see you're flipped the script and you're going Hendrix style. So why don't you tell us how you got your start with music, and maybe you could touch on why you have to play in the opposite hand.
Yeah, so it's an interesting sort of story that's happened here. I am a right-handed person that now plays the guitar with my left hand. The reason for that is I have a condition in my ring finger on my left hand, and any right-handed player is going to know that that's your fretting hand. And it's called focal dystonia. It's very obscure. There's not a lot of data on it, but it is a real thing. And basically, long story short, the brain sends signals to your body how to move, and your body responds. For whatever reason, in my case, there's a certain neural pathway that's trying to communicate to my ring finger, and it just isn't getting through. And the fine motor skill that's needed to type for the keyboard shortcuts that I use to work as a digital artist, as well as the fretting of the chords and the scales, is just not possible for me. It's not painful, but it is a situation where I just can't play it that way. And I tried to rehabilitate it for years. So, the story with the guitar is, I think Gene has touched on this. I mean, we all, and I think yourself in general, we came from a particular environment growing up as kids where we were encouraged to play instruments. There was no gaming industry, there was no game console, there were no Xboxes, there wasn't the social media, there was sports, there was music. And
there was also us having to come in home when the street lights came on.
Yeah. So
we came from Gen X.
Yes,
we made do with what we had. We're the kids that survived lead paint. So I'm going to stop talking now, but go on, Andrew.
Yeah, it was. It's a different generation, but I just don't think that there was. This is just what kids did, and it wasn't so much a neighborhood thing. It really didn't seem to matter what part of town you grew up in. It was just something, either your parents encouraged you to do it, or something in your DNA, just listening. That's just what we did for fun. And it was just, we were really into it. And, of course, there was a place called the Music Bag. There was a teacher, Patrick Hildebrand Sr., who was my instructor. And I just had a natural sort of curiosity about learning from a more experienced person. I didn't look at older people who were more well-versed in a particular topic as boring or something to rebel against, or, oh my God, I have to do what they say. I didn't approach it that way at all. Pat was a cool dude. I mean, he was, an older person. He was not my age. He was the dad of, one of my peers and one of our peers, Patrick Hildebrand Jr. But this was something that I really looked forward to on every Friday, because the lessons were on Friday evenings, and I loved going to the Music Bag, and I loved learning. And I didn't really have the musical facility that I do now. I didn't have the musical knowledge, but Patrick, he imparted some important, musical ideas to me that I picked up on, and I didn't have the discipline at that point to really have a plan. And I think this from all of your years of study at Berklee and as a professional musician. If you want to get better, you've got to have a plan. You've got to have a course of study and practice regimens that you're doing that have to do with musical fundamentals and have to do with daily practice and exercise, not just, playing the solo from Stairway to Heaven again and again and again and memorizing things by rote. If you want to suck as a musician, then don't have a plan. That is one of the biggest takeaways for me, unless you're some kind of genius. And you know, we come into this world with what we have. You know, it's like our hair color and our eye color, our IQ and our abilities are sort of, they kind of are what they are. We can't really do much with that, but we can alter and improve at something and develop an expertise with proper guidance and with daily practice in the right way. And so what happened to me is that I kind of, as a professional and you know, as a husband, as a homeowner, and as someone who was going to make his way in this world, I had to choose the horse that was going to go to the bank. And in my case, it really wasn't music, but it was design. And, you know, I clearly was experiencing a level of professional success, of financial success, designing sets for movies. And I was sustaining that career, and I have sustained it for 27 years. That being said, I love music. I have loved music since my mom noticed me playing a tennis racket when I was 6 or 7, alongside the Lego.
There you go.
And I really wanted to play. And I, again, didn't have the facility that, say, Todd Stockwell did, or Gene Perry. You know, these guys, Todd sounded like John Bonham when he was 17, and Gene Perry is a musical savant. The guy picks up a fucking mandolin and he's you know, a genius. He sounds like Bill Monroe 6 weeks in. I mean, you know, you want to contact a hitman, you know, and just make sure. I mean, it's really frustrating, but you know, that doesn't mean that you can't succeed, you know, if you're realistic and if you're approaching the instrument the right way. So in my case, my condition, this vocal dystonia, actually got worse. You know, there was a moment where I was playing in a band in architecture school, in graduate school. We had a very talented drummer who was a professional. He was in a reggae band before coming to architecture school. We had another rhythm guitar player who he had a gift for feel. And every musician is going to know what that word means. It wasn't that his fingers moved like Joe Satriani's. It's just that what he chose to play was extremely tasteful and in the pocket and just really great. We had a bass player who was competent, you know, very good at what he did. And we had a female vocalist who just had a natural singing voice. You know, we played a series of parties. We never played professionally, but between the different schools that were represented in the band, the drummer and I were in the architecture program, and the guitar player. The singer was from, I believe she was from the graphic design school, and our bass player was from Slavic literature. So we had all of these different schools. So when we would play a party, we'd get about 150 people at the gig.
Yeah. And
these people, this is graduate level, so it's not hyper, you know, 21-year-olds that are just looking just incredibly just energetic. But these people, this is still like, you know, people in their mid to late 20s who are still looking to party and want to dance. And we were able to keep these people moving, and with original material. And that's the level, that's about the level that we got to. And during that time, you know, I had spent a couple of years, as I mentioned, working in architecture in between the undergrad and graduate level years. And at that time, I actually was living with Doug Perry through 1 year of that time. And I had, in the Bay Area, of course, this would have been back, it was a long time ago. It would have been back in like 1998, 99. Basically, actually before that, I'm sorry, more like 94. It was the time when Metallica and Rage Against the Machine, Joe Satriani's Surfing with the Alien had just come out. Jane's Addiction's first album had just come out. The Red Hot Chili Peppers were making a huge splash with Blood Sugar Sex Magic. Rick Rubin, the album Rick Rubin produced. That was the type of style of guitar, you know, that's a big range. But that was the type of guitar that I really wanted to play. And I had a couple of instructors, even back then, who could play that way. And I was trying to get my hands, and I was still playing the guitar right-handed at that time because I was unaware that this condition was there. It was there, it just wasn't getting worse. It would get much worse later on, but I was developing slowly. You know, I wasn't really, in spite of the practice, I just wasn't picking it up. And, one of the instructors was actually a Joe Satriani protege. It was a student of Joe's. And he said, well, you're making progress, but your hands just aren't there. They're just not there. And, you gotta, I don't know how long it's going to take, Andrew, but, you got a ways to go. I got a little better at it in grad school, but as I had to put the guitar down to get serious about, as I say, the horse that goes to the bank, it was the movie business. Mm-hmm. And, coming from Gen X, this was before the internet. This was before the digital tools arrived, that are now taught in schools. Yeah. I had to re-educate myself how to work digitally so that I could have a job and a thriving career. And that meant a whole level of re-education, working on my game every day, every weekend. And so I had my hands full. So it really has only been in the last, say, 7 years that this transition has been happening. It happened in 2016 after I tried desperately to rehabilitate this hand. I've been to all these, specialists, these doctors, everybody was stumped. And my brother, who was older and wiser than me, he was the one who, has just been there to advise me with major issues, major, points in my career, major decisions. He mm-hmm. said, look, you could always switch hands on the guitar. I mean, if you really want to play. And, it goes back to at that moment, it's like looking at the surfer Bethany Hamilton, who lost her arm to a tiger shark years ago. Yeah. Bethany now surfs without an arm. Her father is a shaper of surfboards. He rigged her board differently for her, and she is able to paddle out in heavy surf in Hawaii and win competition. She doesn't just paddle out and surf; she competes. And so she's always been someone that I've looked at for inspiration. I've looked at also there. When you work in the film business, you're oftentimes on location. You're in places like Georgia because they're heavily incentivized states, and they've lured a lot of production there. So you have to be willing to travel. We're like session players. We play on the albums of these movies. I'm a talent that's hired to work on these projects for my skill set.
And just to touch on it, you've kind of gone through most of the questions that I was going to ask you. But Gene mentioned Patrick Hildebrand Sr.
Yeah.
And I do know these people. I know Patrick the second. Mm. And funny story, when 1 year when I was able to get out to the Palisades after graduation and sing with a small group of us that were in the Madrigals, that was the a cappella school choir for Pali High. One of the stops we made as we walked around singing Christmas carols was that music store. And I will try to find a picture. Patrick's in it, myself, Dave Green, and a few other people, all of us that went to Pali, standing right in front of the music shop. And we sang for Mr. Hildebrand, and that was a very cool moment because he did appreciate what we were doing at the time. If you guys heard that, my Siri decides it's going to act a butt. So I hope I didn't get that. But you touched on a lot of things, and so I'll just jump right into this one. You've got a website, andrewreederart.com, and I was thumbing through it, and it showed your work as a set designer on your resume. And I wanted you to talk about that work. And you were mentioning a different type of work that you also do that wasn't included on the resume. Because, ladies and gentlemen, if you go to that website, and it'll be in the show notes, andrewreederart.com, this guy is a Marvel head. Okay? I mean, if you have seen any of the Marvel movies, especially the Avengers and Thor and all of that, you will recognize a lot of the work and the scenery is done by this man that I am talking to today. So just go on and tell us we got about 10 minutes left, so we'll be able to get through this. Tell us about your job as a set designer And then maybe you could throw in what gear you use for not only your guitar playing, and thank you for sharing that. I can relate about the hands. Just real quick, one of my problems growing up was, as a piano player, I got to use both hands. And I just could not get my left hand to do anything the way I wanted to. My brain processed it faster than my fingers did. So it was just a matter of practice for me. But my left hand was always my weaker hand. I am right-handed like you, and I could nail any kind of scale with my right hand, but doing it with the left hand took extra work. So I kind of get it. And you have made some great strides, I can tell, playing, as I call it, Hendrix style. So yeah, tell us about a set designer a little more in detail, as well as the other job you have, what gear you use with your guitars, what programs you're using in your 9 to 5. Just go on and give it all to us.
I'll be brief on the set designer concept artist. They're really two entirely different positions. I basically began as a set designer. You think of that as like the architectural drawings for the set. It basically, once you decide what the Avengers compound or the Quinjet is supposed to look like, you do that in the concept phase. In the set design phase, you turn around and say, okay, how are we we need to come up with drawings and models, 3D models that have taken this thing to an engineering level where it's ready to be fabricated. That really is what set design is all about. It's like an architect doing working drawings of the building. And it's about the detailing of the set, not just how it looks in one image, but how it looks from all images, and whether or not somebody can actually construct it. And today we have many different ways to do that. We have the traditional method with, guys with tool belts on, men and women with tools, building it, with building materials. We also have very advanced forms of doing it with, 5-axis milling machines, 3D printing. So that's set design. Concept artwork is something I also do. That comes before, and that's when you're sitting down with a director and a production designer, and you're really trying to conceptualize what the movie is going to look like. What is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 when we go to the Ego planet? What does that planet look like? What is the architecture on that planet if somebody has a hidden base? What does the operations center look like? It's conceptualizing and working in a very loose way with color, with lighting, and in 3D, trying to make an impression such that somebody, an executive who's paying $200 million to have this movie made gets excited and says, yes, that's what I want my film to look like. Or a director looks at that. So that's the difference. And you need both to do a film. I just grew out of the shoes of a set designer. But really, it's kind of like somebody with an essential position in a band, like the bassist or a drummer deciding, you know what, I want to be the front man, or I want to play lead guitar. It's a completely different role, and it's a completely different position, and there's an expertise that's required. So that's that. I think I want to touch on the gear that I'm playing now.
Go right ahead.
Okay?
Go right ahead.
So, with my hand, making things as easy as possible, particularly now that my right hand is my fretting hand, I chose the American Professional 2 Strat. And the American Professional 2 is a particular type of Strat that features that C-shaped neck, as opposed to the V shape or the U shape. And the C shape is the lowest profile. It really allows my hand and gives my hand the greatest opportunity, as a running start to fret. It's not, and my hands are very average. They're not large at all, and my fingers are not particularly long. So it makes it easier for me to play. I'm getting the more I play in Goat Rodeo, the more I play with people like you, who are very, very experienced, the deeper I go. I have 2 instructors now that I'm learning from online. Tim Pierce is one of the top session players, and also Tomo Fujita, who has an online site that you can learn from, the Guitar Wisdom site. I'm finding that there are fundamentals that I was just not aware of. And there are musical principles that both of these guys are talking about. And if you take the time to learn them, they're paying enormous dividends for me. I now know what it's like to play with a healthy fretting hand, by the way, even though it's not my dominant hand. So I'm running everything through a Katana combo amp. It's an MK2 100 watt unit. I'm probably going to be moving away from the combo amp because the deeper I get and the better I get, I'm beginning to appreciate what it means to have a sound, what it means to have your tone. The first goal for me was to simply develop the facility to play. That's in motion. That's starting, as you know. But now comes the time to really start to customize and craft my own individual sound. In order to do that, I'm probably going to need to have a real tube amp. I'm going to need to invest in that. What I have now pedal-wise, I have a Keeley compressor, which is great. It basically, as you know, it takes the lows and it brings them down. It takes the highs and it boosts those up. It's great for playing the funk that I like to play. I have a Qtron, which is made by Electro Harmonics. That gives me the Jerry Garcia tone that I love. It's also incredibly versatile. I have a Boss OC5 Octaver, which I run with my overdrive, and I love the way that sounds for my leads. I'm beginning to use, because I'm playing in a band, controlling my own dynamics, my own volume is key. So I'm using two things to do that. I'm using an Ernie Ball volume pedal, which comes with a tuner, which is wonderful because nobody likes to listen to somebody tune. And I'm using a Boss EV30 expression pedal. And what that's allowing me to do is control the master volume on my amp. So what's going to be happening the more Goat Rodeo plays is I'm going to be experimenting with projecting forward, like you and Todd have been yelling at me to do for the last year. When it's time to take a lead solo, now that there seems to be some dexterity enough in my fingers to actually take a lead solo, I don't have to hang out. Then there's the last thing is the Crybaby wah that's going to be moving to a full tone super wah. All of this is coming through a company, Sweetwater, which every musician knows. They're an awesome company. Yeah. They're an awesome company. I have a personal relationship with one of their salespeople that has called me every time I make a sale. If there's anything we can do, Mr. Reader, just let me know. You have any questions? It's just today, being a musician today, I'm glad. That's one thing I'm really glad about is that we have the University of YouTube to learn from. Is that, these two.
Exactly. I'm able to use YouTube. I am a graduate member of the YouTube Academy. And I tell you, it's gotten me out of a multitude of issues. Yes. It's not just for listening to the music. There are a number of great how-to videos on YouTube as well. So in the last few minutes that we have remaining, Andrew, and like I said, I'm going to put your information for the website and have people check it out, see what it is you do. And I know you've got your feelers out there, so you definitely don't need me to help you find work. I need you to do that for me. But, you gave some advice to the listeners, so I'm just going to go to the very last question. So what's in your car? What do you listen to when you're out and about, when you're on your way down to rehearsal?
Well, I think it's probably more like what do I listen to every morning? Because I try to start every morning with a workout, and I have, an iPad and a set of headphones there to allow me to just listen to Spotify. And, I find that Spotify has this wonderful Discover Weekly channel. And every time I open it, every morning, there's a new list of songs. And of course, the algorithms are tracking what I listen to. And I listen to everything from funk to the blues, to traditional blues, and classic Southern rock. Those three genres are sort of home for me. There's Johnny Winter is, for my playing, is one of those players that, I look to for a lot of the lead work that I'm doing. Certainly Corey Wong, is another guitarist, a contemporary person that I'm definitely going to be checking out as far as his, his courses are concerned and his style of playing with his band Wolfpack. I love listening to older types of music. I love listening to Kool and the Gang. I love listening and opening myself, to what came before, in the 70s. There's so many different, artists out there that have had an influence on me. There's Buddy Guy, who, recently there's a great documentary on him. And this is somebody that, he just had this explosive style of playing, the instrument that, there's been lessons there about, his blues playing, Jeff Beck, and there are bands that I'm interested in that are just kind of off the radar. There are bands like Oysterhead, for example, which are a funk band that don't feature a lot of vocals, but the grooves. There's a band called the Magic Beans, with just an incredible track called Sweet Thing.
There's a lot of good music out there to listen to. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Music Outlook LA Gigs Gear Info. Thanks again to my guest, Andrew Reeder, and be sure to check out his website, andrewreederart.com. Also, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast at both Spreaker.com, Spreaker, and on YouTube. Music Outlook LA is also available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Amazon Music, SoundCloud, Spotify, CastBox, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, and Listen Notes, the podcast search engine. You can also rate the podcast at podchaser.com. I'm Will Kimsey, a.k.a. WK Music. Peace.
This podcast is both brought to you and produced by Kimsey Entertainment, LLC. Music Outlook LA is a copyrighted broadcast of Kimsey Entertainment, LLC. The views and opinions expressed on this show are not necessarily those of Will Kimsey or Kimsey Entertainment, LLC. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or any other use of this product without the express written consent of Kimsey Entertainment, LLC is strictly prohibited.